The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
No. I don't believe it. It's not possible.
I didn't say it would be easy, Neo. I just said it would be the truth.
Stop. Let me out. Let me out!
Samru Ladonai Bechinor.
Shabbat Shalom. Bruchim Abiyim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together today, starting with the question, when is the last time that we learned something new? No, I mean new. No, stop that. I mean, not in addition to the house of cards we call consciousness that has already been built over decades by adding a few more facts over what we already know to be true. If, just pulling something out of the very back recesses of my brain, we believe that our, for instance, favorite football team was robbed on a controversial call, then new isn't one more blogger that shows another angle to prove what we already believe. It is the perspective of the blogger of the team we dislike who shows the angle that calls our perspective into question. So, trying again, when was the last time that we took in information that forced us to evaluate what we believed, reevaluate, and that eventually caused us to change something that had been previously locked away by a very jealous ego? That's what I mean. It should be obvious, but we humans don't do new information very well. And we have cause. It's also quite hilarious, as if you Google cognitive dissonance, you will get nearly 8 million hits. We can see and have seen under fMRI the neurological basis for it. Most of us use the term cognitive dissonance on a relatively regular basis. Some folks have probably even read about Dr. Leon Festinger and his research with the UFO cult in the 1950s, where this term was coined. But, and this is a very big but, when we use this term, it is most likely focused on them and certainly not on us, because cognitive dissonance, part of the disturbing underlying neurology of taking in new information that contradicts what we already allowed to camp out behind our eyes at the most basic levels, the different parts of our brain fire when encountering dissonant information, then confirming information. And it's not just about information. No matter how much we have studied Vulcan philosophy and imagine ourselves to process via logic, the parts of our brain that process dissonance contain emotional responses as well as triggers to our sense of morality. Restated, if we show someone with a prejudice that ties into their ideology a factual contradiction to their prejudice, they will not process it logically, or we will not process it logically. Rather, they or we will weigh it emotionally against our prejudice. Think about that. Oh wait, will thinking about that actually do us any good? What can we possibly do? And with our opening scene in mind, it's also worth noting how we now use, today, especially online, the blue and red pill symbols of the Matrix franchise as symbols for not changing versus seeing the truth and changing. And then notice how many people who take the red pill afterward never change and never challenge what they have now locked away. It's complicated because cognitive dissonance. There's a famous midrash from Midrash Tanchuma that quotes Deuteronomy 29:13, and not only with you have I made the covenant on Sinai, but rather the generations that have yet to come were also there at that time. And in case that last part wasn't quite clear enough, the section concludes with Rav Abahu quoting Rav Samuel Bar Nachmani, because all souls were there even when their bodies had not yet been created. This is critical. Not just because the passage is often studied at Shavuot, not just because it's one of those feel-good passages, but because the underlying theology is critical to understanding Revelation itself. You see, well, let's get honest for a second. On its surface, this can only be feel-good because simply and literally, I was not present at Sinai when the narrative law was given. If, however, Revelation was never meant to be understood as a single magical act in time, but rather an ongoing and binding process, then we were and are there. We were there because it is our narrative, and we are there because we're a part of it. We're still a part of it. if we choose to be a part of it. Of course, if any of us see the Torah as only something to be read as literal history, or conversely, only a silly myth that does not apply to me, then we cannot hear this discussion as we are currently engaging in the process of cognitive dissonance. Are our stomachs getting that uncomfortable feeling? Are we reaching through our neural pathways for a remembered lecture from someone that proves what I, and let's not forget Midrash, says is wrong? Are we already reaching to open a new tab on our browser to go to a more trusted source that will assure me what I know to be true is still as true now as it was before someone suggested we can dare look at Torah metaphorically? Or dare say Torah should be taken seriously at all? Isn't cognitive dissonance fun? I very much believe in the centrality of this midrash in understanding Jewish theology because it matches with Judaism as an iterative process. Put differently, the epitomization of the law in the Torah is the expression of the law in the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances, or most popularly, and in my opinion most misleadingly, the 10 Commandments. How many times do we read this distillation of Jewish legal, moral, and ethical obligation? Well, we have this week, Parashat Yitro, and then we get it again in a slightly altered form somewhere in the summer with Parashat V'Etchanan. And of course, don't forget, we have one of our most important holidays, one of the Chagim, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Shavuot. This is the celebration of Matan Torah, or Kabbalat Torah, or the giving or receiving of Torah on Sinai. And of course, for Shavuot, the 10 utterances are read. And just in case you miss one of these, look in most Sidurim, and it's there for us every morning after we finish praying Shacharit. It's almost like we are to continuously encounter these utterances, almost like that means something more important than just being able to name them. Torah itself, if not Judaism as a whole, is setting us up to constantly encounter revelation, which I will argue makes revelation important not just on the surface through this narrative. Revelation's about the law that's been captured in the narrative, in addition to what comes from our dialogue as we continuously encounter it. If that doesn't make any sense, quick test. Did honor your father and mother mean something different to you at age 2, 7, 15, 23? Do I need to go on? Let alone, God forbid, what this means after we have lost our parents. And yet, with all this repetition, we still have not really internalized the utterances. I sense disagreement. Well, take a deep breath and be ready for some parts of our brain firing outside of proper Vulcan logic.
You can use logic to justify almost anything. That's its power. And its flaw. From now on, bring your logic to me.
Just off the top of my head, allowing the meaning of the text to be as important as the words themselves, how many of us prioritize meaningless things above that which should have meaning? Take, for instance, do we yell at more strangers on the internet than we do encourage those that rely on us? That is bowing before an idol. Do we unplug enough each week to relieve our anxieties from our hyper-plugged-in state? Shabbat. Have we ever misrepresented another's arguments, created a straw man online because they were part of the other group, and in doing so caused folks in our group to as well discount that person? False witness. How about the entire purpose of Instagram and how bad we feel about ourselves for the looks and belongings of influencers? Covet. Something tells me we stink at the revelation because we're not sure how to relate to any revelation. Because cognitive dissonance. There is an oddity about how revelation is presented in the Torah. Actually, it's not only what's written, it's that the wise persons in Jewish history that divided the Torah into separate portions highlighted this oddity with how and when revelation is presented. It would have been logical, for instance, to have had the parsha containing the 10 utterances start with the famous words, "I am the eternal your God that brought you out of the land of Egypt." Even backing up a few verses to the thunder, lightning, smoke, and the sound of a shofar would make sense. Setting the stage is cool and dramatic and great storytelling. Heck, even Moses ordering the 3 days of preparation before the revelation makes sense. Although for us today, the details of those 3 days rings a little strange as we do not have the same concerns regarding bodily purity. Instead, we get Jethro, Yitro, priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, God's people, how the Eternal had brought Israel out of the land of Egypt. So we're about to get the central narrative image of Revelation, the source of law that is one of the most binding and defining elements of Judaism's unique evolution, and the portion starts with a discussion about the in-laws. Oh, it's better than that. Jethro not only shows up after the drama of the plagues, after some family business, he starts right in by telling Moses exactly what Moses is doing wrong and what he needs to do instead. And folks say the Torah isn't real, other than some good clean fun at the expense of all of our in-laws, none of whom would ever do such a thing as Jethro. Is there anything that should be read into where the parasha that contains the 10 utterances begins? Seriously, such things are simply arbitrary, aren't they? And yet, the choice was still made to begin this central and critical parasha with Jethro's appearance. So, in-law sarcasm aside, and with the assumption that those who wrote, edited, and organized Jewish texts might just be more intelligent than we moderns like to admit, let's look at the events from Jethro's appearance up to the giving of the law and see if there is something to see. The first thing we notice is the fullness of the reunion. It isn't just Jethro, but as well Moses' wife Zipporah and their 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. And for those of us that love to appear in control emotionally at all times, the reunion is quite emotional and includes mutual concern, which begins with each other asking about each other's welfare, about each other's shalom. Then they catch up, recounting the momentous events from the dawn of their parting up to this reunion. And if it all sounds like standard fare, think of what revelation means. Change. You cannot be the same after you have received revelation, otherwise that word cannot apply. And just how comfortable is change? Silly question. So, who do we want around us when we go through the disruptions that change will bring? Those that legitimately share in the fate and fortunes of our lives. Family and chosen friends, family. If our lives fall apart, how many of our 1,000 Facebook friends will hold us as we cry, will drive us at 3 a.m. to the emergency room? Maybe some. A handful if we are truly fortunate, but most likely those that hold us were already family or chosen family friends before we friended them or they friended us. Now comes the in-law part, completely stripped of sarcasm. Jethro, a man of influence and wisdom, sees that Moses is spending his entire time hearing petty grievances from the gathered multitude. Torah in its wisdom gives us one of the first historical cases of work burnout, and it wasn't even because of a global pandemic. I mean, plagues and grumbling kinfolk, sure, but at least it wasn't a global pandemic. Jethro pushes Moses to do what some of us do so poorly. Let go. Stop micromanaging. Recognizing the parts of our ego that demand that we are the only ones who can possibly do the job. And even if we are right, that failing to empower others will only do us in more quickly. Then comes Sinai prep time. Moses is commanded to order everyone to abstain for 2 days from certain familial relational fun. And Moses thinks it's such a great idea that he makes the 2-day recommendation a 3-day requirement. It's partly where we get the term boneh seag ala Torah, build a fence around the Torah. Once again, perhaps this seems silly until we ask the part that comfort plays in our refusal to hear anything beyond what our ego has already established to be the only possible truth. If we are comfortable, there is simply no reason to change, even if the comfort is coming from sources, behaviors, and activities that frankly should make us quite uncomfortable. This is the entire idea behind the full fast of Yom Kippur. Without food, drink, worrying about primping in a mirror, and thinking about what needs to happen in bed to bring about maximum pleasure, we might just have enough bandwidth to ask if we might have hurt someone in the past year. This is not to suggest that any part of consensual sexuality is discouraged in Judaism, quite the contrary, rather that too much of a good thing can create a false sense of comfort over the other issues that need to be addressed. Just to step one step further, think about makeup sex without having actually worked through the fight in the first place. That's what I'm talking about. And then finally, in this Yitro narrative comes lightning, thunder, smoke, shofar, and probably dogs and cats in the street, but also the wisdom to make implicit just how terribly painful revelation can be, for as the words of the eternal begin to fill every part of the brains gathered, forcing both Vulcan and human parts of our gray matter to fire, we begin, according to the text lightly and according explicitly to Midrash, to die. It's too much. We had to back off the mountain. The Revelation narrative is filled with warnings about coming too close to the pureness of the voice of the eternal. Simply put, if we hear at once all that we need to learn in a lifetime, there is no way we can handle it. We cannot see who we actually are in our fullness. As the Kotzker Rebbe put it, the giving took place on one day, the receiving takes place at all times. Yes, we are shackled by our neurology, and cognitive dissonance hampers honest efforts to better ourselves by forcing ourselves into the Jewish requirement of machloket l'shem hashamayim, disagreement for the sake of heaven. Yet the constant repetition of encountering revelation in our yearly cycle suggests that we Jews have known that all along, just without the fMRI scans of blue and red state brains listening to voices from red or blue states. But it's not just the repetition, it's the preparation. And for this, Jethro tells us exactly what a good therapist or life coach is going to mentor. So running back through the story, therapeutically, step 1, recount the true and honest story of where we are in our lives, surrounded by people who we trust to lift us up and not tear us down. 2, become aware of where and to whom we are giving our energy, put ourselves into present time, and place ourselves in the activities that elevate the soul rather than exhaust us for the sake of a clinging ego. Step 3, prepare ourselves for the coming of revelation by admitting that we don't know everything, that we must be wrong about something, and recognizing the discomfort that these thoughts bring about. And then we actually set in front of us the contradictory information, whether that be a book or a podcast or a good friend we have not spoken with in a long time because they dared to vote for the other person. Step 4, receive revelation. Oh, that last one's the rub, huh? Because cognitive dissonance. That is where the iterative question comes in. Ideally, we can look back and ask, when in the last year have I experienced cognitive dissonance? This actually doesn't work at all. The secret to removing ourselves from the trap of our own egos demanding that nothing we believe can possibly be wrong is not retrospection, but rather awareness in the moment. Awareness, something spiritual. Surprise, surprise. When we are listening to something and we start feeling that burning in our stomach, the uncomfortable sweat, the clear signs that our ideological defenses are being raised, we need to name it in that moment. None of this is going to happen if we haven't started with the meta choice to say, I believe that in some ways I must be wrong. And when we get to the point where we're feeling these moments of discomfort, instead of pushing them away, it means we have to think about it enough to make the connection when it begins to occur. That means you need to name it as it happens, out loud, explicitly. I'm listening to a podcaster saying that The Matrix 2 or 3 was a much better movie than the first. I'm sweating, I'm getting angry, my ego is built around the sure knowledge that The Matrix is the better movie and that I am right. These arguments that I'm hearing, I'm uncomfortable because I'm listening to it with my already formed ideology and not my Vulcan logic. Oh, but have comfort, dear friends. Experiencing cognitive dissonance does not mean that I'm wrong, as The Matrix is, according to universal truth, the better of these two films. At some point, however, I am going to be wrong when I feel that discomfort, and can only correct it if I walk through the process of calling out the cognitive dissonance as it happens, and then acting with enough humility to see if I need to read more, listen to more, discuss more with someone outside of my Hallelujah chorus. Once again, Torah is setting us up to have clear expectation of revelation. If not, then we would never have the opportunity to change, grow, and correct the harms of the past. But we remain in a world that allows us to continue in the thing that is the most comfortable, regardless of it being right or wrong from a more universal perspective. So we repeat, slowly through actual, definable, and tangible spiritual work, prepare for, and then deal with the discomfort, if not downright pain, of revelation. And then even on occasion, listen to the wisdom of our in-laws. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next time.
בחצות זרות וקול שופר הריעו לפני המלך אדוני